Hey guys, am I audible? Can anyone confirm? Let me share my screen. Okay, you guys can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Let's continue with in the last class we built this tic-tac-toe app, the basic one, and then we also build one with the time travel feature. So that is this one, right? So for time travel, we used immutability concept in React, and we used array of arrays. Okay, so now I'll move it to, let's say, with time travel. So you can get that code here. Okay, so now we can remove this. We can build a basic component again. And let's discuss some more important concepts in React. Okay, so let me start the development server. So here we can say npm run dev. Excuse me, guys. Sorry. Yeah, so this is not there, right? So we have to install the dev dependencies. So now we have installed it and we get this node modules, right? That our project is powered on. And now we can say npm run dev. Or let's put it here only. Okay. So, guys, what is the way if we want to pass data from the parent component to child? What was the way that we had?
Props.
Yeah. So when we were passing data, let me put React here. So we had the way of using props, right? So for example, if we have a app component and let's say this is the main component, let me copy paste this boxes. Okay, so the component tree can be any component tree, guys. Okay, it can be domain dependent. So for example, let's say too many boxes. So the app can be any componentry, okay? It can be like this, it can be like this, whatever. You can name it any component. For e-commerce, it can be other, but we know that the parent component will always be app, and it can be any nested components, right? These are the child components for the app. So we can name it component A. Let's name it B, C, and D, and E. Now what we want to do is we want to pass the data. We want to pass the data from A to C. So how do we do that? Okay, we know we have something called as props, right? So we can pass the data from A to C. Now, what if guys, if the data is present here in the A component and we want to pass the data from A to E, then how do we pass it? If we want to pass the data from A to E component, then how do we pass it? Because the use case or the data that we have to use would be in E component, now not in C component. How do we do that, guys? It's simple, right?
First we will pass to C and then C will pass to E.
So this props will go on here.
Yeah.
And during our tic-tac-toe app, what we saw was, right, let's say if you want to pass the data from A to D, then how would you do that? Then only the way that we did in tic-tac-toe app is we lifted the state up. So lifting the state up means that you are putting the state data to its parent component, and now you pass that data here also as props, here also as props, and here also as props, right? Now in the whole application, the data is being used only in E component and D component, right? So all these passing down props, all these props is a headache, right? And imagine this is a very small application where we have how many? Three, four, six components, right? But your app can have hundreds of components, thousands of components. So then the data passing becomes messier, and this particular problem is called as prop drilling, where you are passing the props, drilling it down until the end where you require it. And that is a problem, guys. Why it's a problem? Because the data is being used here only. The data is not being used here, the data is not being used here, the data is not being used here, but we have to pass it because ultimately it needs to go to its child, to its child, and to its child. So this problem is called as prop drilling. Is it clear, this part?
Yes, I will.
Okay, others as well.
Mhm.
Okay, so what should be the solution to it, guys? What do you think? So now we don't want to pass props. So what will be the best way, guys?
We need to use the state so that it can be used in all the components.
No, no, this is a state only, right? This is a state. Whenever the state changes, the component gets passed the data as props, and then we see the updated data on the UI. So what are we trying to minimize here? What are we trying to minimize here? So there are a lot of ways to do it, guys, but the basic way that would come to your mind is that okay, we have a data somewhere, and let's say that okay, we want to minimize this props or we want to limit the props, so we can delete the props. We don't want to pass props. But what was the main core thing behind it, that we want to do what? We want to give access to the data to the components and consume only where we want it, or consume only in that component. Is it making sense, guys? Then this problem would be solved. Then this problem would be solved how? So there should be some ways. There are again a couple of ways to do that, but there should be some way that we have a layer around our application, or this layer can be on the whole app, or this layer can be on a small part of the application, let's say up till here, or a small part of the tree, right, or the whole tree. And what we can do is whatever the data we have in any component, we can just move that data back to the layer, this layer that is wrapping around. And wherever you want to consume that data, let's say you want to consume it in the C component, we can get that from C, right? If you want to get the data from to the D component, so you can consume it here. Now all that headache of passing down props is gone, right? So this is the fundamental solution to that problem, but there are multiple ways to do that, right? A lot of people would use state management tools in React. So like we have Redux, Flux, Zstand. Each of them are libraries, different libraries of their own. And again, some has larger boilerplate code, some has smaller boilerplate code, some has a lot of features more than the state management, right? Like data fetching, all those things. So it really depends on your use case and the requirements. But the one solution is to use state management tools in React. And the idea is that they will make this data or the state global. So when you make it global, it will be access to any part of the application. The other inbuilt mechanisms that we have is that is widely used is React Context API. So that we'll cover now. And again, there are different patterns that you can use. Other than that, okay, so you can do that. But the core idea is that these are the solutions that we have. Ultimately, they solve the core basic problem, that is the prop billing. So, any questions here? Anyone? Right? Although I told you, right, this lifting the state up, that is also a solution to this problem. Then we also have something called as composition pattern in React, lifting the state up. Right? The add context API is something that is built in, and these are also built in, but this is external libraries that we have to use. There is also one more solution, that is you can create your own custom hooks. So this is also we'll cover, let's say today. And we can also use in some cases, guys, the routing. So we can get some data from the parameters. Let's say that this is the one, right? So we can get the data from the URLs, from the route parameters. And there is this new pattern that has emerged with Next.js, and that is basically server components. It is new in the React architecture, but if you are using Next.js, a framework, it will automatically prevent prop drilling. It will just fetch and render the data closer to where this particular is needed, right? So this is new to React, or you can say you can use in Next.js, or you can say new to React architecture. Okay, so when to choose what? When to choose, right? So it depends upon your requirements, but you should know the solutions, you should know the trade-offs. So I would say, guys, just go through these terms once, and I'll not tell you now, because if I tell you now, then it won't make any sense because you don't know the implementation of all of them. Okay, so let us see how we can work with React Context APIs first. So let's say that we are starting with React Context API, and the idea is very simple now. Now you know that most of the things are solved like this. Okay, great. So what we can do, guys, is it creates a layer like this. How will I'll tell you, but React Context API is an inbuilt part of React. Okay. And why will you use it, guys? Because the same data is used in multiple trees. It multiple siblings. Siblings is this, right? So this is the parent, this is child. This is a parent, this is child. This arrow does not make sense. Yeah, yeah, okay. This was for getting the data. These two are siblings. These two are siblings, right? So you pass props only to bridge the gap, but then it is creating chaos. It is creating a lot of things in your application. So what this context do? It is basically it makes the data again same pattern. It makes the data global, right? And it is not a state management solution, right? So people often get confused that it's the whole state management solution. You can do a lot of things here, but not. It is not a state management solution by itself, but it will easy the job for us, right? It is ideal for those things, guys. I'll put it here. It is ideal for the use cases like if you want to pass some user authentication info inside your app, if you want to have a theme, right? Implementation, let's say light or dark. So it is ideal for those cases. If you want to do some language thing, right? So you can say internationalization. So you can use IE18 library in this context, right? If you have some app configuration that you want to do. So a lot of use cases. You can also create a small shared stores. You can do all of that stuff, but it is not a state management tool on its own, right? So there are three components of React Context API. Sorry, two components. One is the provider and one is the consumer. It makes sense. What provider will do? The provider will provide the data to the data layer. That is nothing but your context. Let's say that we have this context here, and this is the provider. So provider will make the data accessible to all the components or wherever this wrapper is there, and these are the consumers. So this is one consumer you want to consume. This is one consumer you want to consume. So this is pretty simple. I hope you are getting a little bit sense out of it. But let's actually create some example, okay, and how we can do that. So there are three steps in which we can create a particular, I would say, this particular thing, right? So let's go here. Let's have,
React context API state management is different, right, Sahil?
yeah. So I said, na, it's not a state management tool by itself. A lot of people say that it's a state. See, it's not a state management tool. You have to combine React context API, React context API should be combined with, mostly it's combined with use reducer, but for small applications you can also do use state, right? And then it becomes a state management tool.
Okay.
Right? So you have to why? Because use reducer and use state sets the state, right? And then the React re-renders, and that is a state management tool, but that is also not as perfect as uh, these options, right? Like Redux, Flux, that stand. Okay. Okay. So let's create a very basic setup and let's try to understand. So in order to create the context, guys, let's say that first we have a user component, and let's say we have a user. It just does what? Let's say return for now a div, and we can say it returns user1 component. We can call the user here like this. Similarly, we have to create user1, and let's say it in turns returns user2. Then we can say user2, it returns, let's say, user3. And finally, the user3 would want to return an h1 of, let's say, hello John, and John is the current user. This is static, but let's try to make some sense, right? So it's working fine. It's John, and this is the component tree that we have, right? So what we can do here, let's say we have a data. Okay, we have a data, let's say here. So we have the app component, right? So what we are trying to do is we'll create a context. So there are three steps. So one thing is you create the context, that is the layer. You use the provider component to provide the data to the tree, any tree or nest, right? And then you use consumer component to consume the data. So we can say const user context to be, either you can import React or you can directly say create context. It's inbuilt in the library. If you want to pass any initial data, you can pass, but that's fine. You can keep it as it is. So now when you do console.log user context, and let's go here, you will see that it's nothing but an object. It has two components, that is provider and consumer. And you will see the current value as undefined. But if you put some initial value, you will get the initial value. Okay, so we have to use it. Right. So how do we do that? First, where do we want to give the access to the data to, right? So let's say we want to target this tree. We want to target the user and user3 tree. So we can use the provider component, and we are getting that from the user context. So we can say user context dot provider, and this is the pattern that we use. So now whatever the data that we pass as a value property to this provider, that data will have access to this user and its child components and its tree basically up till the end. So we can say that okay, the data that we want to pass is just John, and now we are passing it, so we are making it accessible. And now you want to consume it. Let's say you want to consume it directly in the user3 itself, right? So how do we do that? So one way is that we put this on top. and we have this consumer, right? So we can go, we can say, I think it should be a weird syntax. So let's say user context dot consumer, and then here we will get that particular value, and we can return the h1, and we can pass the value here, and we should see the John printed correctly. So this is the structure of how to create a very, very basic context. Now this type of pattern is something that is called as composition pattern. So whenever you wrap the components like this becomes the children, right? This and its other components become the children. Similarly here, we are consuming the context. So we consume it like this. So we have a function here, and that function gives us the data. So let's try to see if it works. So let's have a different name here, and you can see automatically it pulls on that particular layer. So this is one of the way of using providers and consumer. Now this syntax is something, guys, that is not weird, but it's complex, right? If we have more and more logic. So in order to avoid this, now we have a, with latest update, we have a hook that is called as use context hook. So what we can do is we can say const user to be use context, and make sure that you import this use context from React. Now this is a hook, that hook can be used everywhere, and there can be multiple. I have given an example here, right? There can be multiple stores or the context, right? So how this use context will know you want to extract the data from which context? So you pass that here, and now directly you can do is you can comment this out, and directly we can say we want to use the user value, and it should work as it is. So now the syntax, this is also the earlier way I have told you, but now people and even I prefer this way because this is a latest hook pattern, and this is more easier to use. You just use a use context hook, you pass the context from where you want to extract the data, and you just use that value. Now, very important thing, this data we have used as string just to make you understand the very, very basic setup. But this will normally be object. It can be arrays of objects. It can be objects of objects. It could be objects functions, right? It could be anything. So that is one thing. But is this part clear, everyone? Any questions in this part? Okay. What about others? Benazir, Diksha
I
said yes.
don't
Rajiv,
understand.
Pooja, Akshay, Nazir. Yeah. Someone was asking anything? Okay. So this is a very, very basic context setup, guys. Now let's try to advance it on how it is used in production applications and something like that. Okay. So I'll put a context folder here, and I'll say basic React context setup. Let's put it here. And yeah, so that's it. Okay. So let's try now. Or let's create two setups. So I think after that, this particular part will become easier, right? So let's say that we are creating some kind of theme application, and we want to provide the theme inside our app. Okay. So now one, let me ask you one thing, guys. So we created all those setups here. We created the context here. We created all those components here, right? But tell me one thing: should all of these components and context will be in the same file in bigger applications? No, in bigger applications, everything would be in their separate files. Okay. So similarly, we would have a file, and let me do one thing, guys. What I'll do is, yeah. So what I'll do is I'll create a file. Let's call it as theme context dot js, or right, or if you are not using JSX, then JS would work. So the purpose of this is to create the setup. We know that we require three things. So what are the three things we require, guys, in order to create the React Context API? What are the three things, guys, that we require? React no, first we have to create the context, then provider, and then consumer,
Yeah,
right? So you
yeah,
have to remember
context
all these three
container.
points. Yeah. So if you don't remember this, guys, then it will be hard, right, to create the pattern. So what we can do is, let's copy this. Let's put it to theme context. Okay. So let's say const, and you can change the name because now it makes more sense to provide this name, right? And we can say create context. And ultimately, guys, we want to do something like theme context dot provider, but to make that setup easier, we what we do is we create a component altogether. Okay. So we can do is we I can export a component, and this is our custom component. So we can name it, let's say, export function. Let's name it as theme provider, and it will just return theme context dot provider. Okay. Now one question would be coming to your mind is, okay, what we are going to do, right? Let's say we want to provide the data to the app and all of its child component. So we can go to the main file where the app component is called, and we can wrap our theme provider. We can wrap our theme provider like this, right? That makes sense. We imported the theme provider from the theme context file. We wrapped, but the problem is how it will know, how it will know that the data should be provided to app and its child, because earlier we were doing something like this, right? But how will it know now? Anyone has any idea? How would we know that the value of the app and its componentry should come here, right? Somehow. So we have a very good pattern in React, that is children, right? So now it will make much more sense when we are using something like this, or when the React is using the strict mode, right? So behind the scenes, you can use the components like this, but whatever you put between them would automatically come as an inbuilt children prop. So you can destructure the children prop and you can put that children prop here. So this is inbuilt in React. You cannot just name it child or something like that, right? It has to be children only. And let me tell you, so I can go here and say console.log children, and okay, so what is the issue? Theme context dot provider. Okay, so with white we can call it GSX, and I think now if we do that, should work. Yeah. Okay, so if I go to console in the children, what do you see, guys? What is the children? Guys, can anyone tell me? Look at it and tell me what is the children? What do you see? What do you make sense out of this, guys, when you see this?
Object.
Yeah, and what that object represents? It's a component app. You see that, right?
Yes.
Everyone is able to see that, right? So now it can be anything. For this case, it is the app component, but let's say, but then it will not load, right? Let's say I put h1 of hello world. Then what? Then I go here. I say now the children has become what? Array. And each array would represent the children. So this would be h1. So this would be app component. So is it making sense to everyone? Guys, is it making sense why we are using children? This is a very, very important pattern that gives power to this kind of syntax that we are using. So no matter whatever this inside the components is, it can be an element, it can be a app, it can be anything, right? So it becomes the children, and that is how we are able to work with this pattern. This part is clear, right? Okay. So we can go to the theme context. And so this part is clear. Another important thing, guys, that we can do is basic setup, that we want to consume something, right? So every time I told you that the user needs to import use context, and then the user needs to pass this theme context, right? So can we create our custom hook? So, or maybe let's do that later on. Let's do that later on while we are consuming. So now we want to pass the data to the app and its child. So what kind of data we want, right? So we want to be able to set the theme. We should be able to pass the theme. So for that, it's a changing data. It's a data that is changing over time based on either user preference or the button click. So we can say const theme and set theme to be useState, and the initial part we can just put it as empty string, or the initial theme we can put is light. So we can have a function, let's say const toggle theme, and this function, its job is to just toggle the theme between light and dark. So we can say set theme, and again guys, I told you to you can directly set it to dark or you can directly set it to light. You can do that, right? You could do something like if theme is equal to light, then we do dark, otherwise we do light. So either you can do it in this way or you can write in a better way where you ensure, because these things are asynchronous, right? So the state updates can be asynchronous. So the better way to be that you use a callback. So what do you mean by callback? So you can use the same thing. You can use a callback function. This callback function will ensure that you will get the previous updated state, and then you can use that logic to the previous state, or you can say previous theme. Whatever, it's just a parameter name, and this will ensure that you get the updated state, and then it changes the state accordingly. So if it is light, we change it to dark. If it is dark, we change it to light. And what do we need to pass as the data is? So we pass it in the value property, and guys, we want to pass an object. We pass an object, or maybe you could do something like this. You can say const. What we can pass, right? You can say props or anything, right? You can just name it a simple variable. Let's say const data that we want to pass. That can be an object, and we want to pass the theme data. We want to pass the toggle theme function, and either you can do it directly here or you can do it like this. Okay, this is the setup that we did. So ultimately what we are passing as the data, we are passing an object. That object contains a state variable, and it contains the function to set that variable, right? Now we can go to our app.jsx. We can create a home component here, and this home component is something that we have to create. So we can say home.jsx, and let's create that component, basic component. Let's call that component. So we should see home component here, and inside our home component, let's say that we have h1 of the current theme. So how do we get that, guys? You want to somehow get the theme from where? You want to get this from where? Guys, we need to get this data from where? No, Nazir is saying parent app. No, we don't want it from parent app. Akshay is correct. We want it from context, right? So, can anyone tell me how do we get it from the context? Yeah, that is fine. Theme context. So Rajiv is correct. We can use uh, right. We can use so what was the two ways that I told you guys? That's what I'm asking. So one is the use consumer. One is the use context. So we can say const. Uh, you can name it anything, right? So what we can do is we can say theme and we can say use context. So what we need to pass in the use context, we need to pass the theme context, right? But the problem is, are we exporting the theme context here? No. So then you have to export this as well, and this is fine. This is totally fine. And then we want to import it here, and yeah, and this should be used here. So always remember the rules of hooks, guys. Whatever the hook that you are using, it should be on the top level management and it should not be in any if else condition, right? Otherwise, it will give the error. So you can see if I use it on top, you will see that you cannot use it in the top level. It should be called inside a function component and then in the top level. So this is the top level. And remember, this data is not a variable or something, right? It's an object. So we have to extract it from the object. So we destructure it from the object. And now I think we see this perfectly fine. And then what we can do is we can say a button and we can say toggle theme. We can attach a on click event and we can just call the toggle theme. So it becomes the callback function for this event. And this toggle theme will be extracted again from here because that's what we were passing out. So now you can see that it works exactly same, right? So this part is clear. Any questions? Anyone? Guys, this part is clear. Rajiv, Pooja, Benazir, Diksha, Akshay. Okay. Now, what we can do is, if you want, then you can give it some styles based on uh, this particular part, right? So you can have a style object, and you can say based on the theme. If theme is light, give the light background. If it's dark, then give the dark background. So those part is there, but this is how we are doing the data flow. Okay. So another important thing that I was telling you guys is that, okay, this if you want to use this another component, then there will be an extra import and then will be this extra line, right? So what could be a better way? So to answer that, I want to understand from you. Now you have seen use state hook and you have seen use context hook. So what do you understand by the term this hook, guys? When you have seen the implementation, what is the hook? What do you understand by this term hook, guys? Because tell me, right? Because these things will be asked when you are giving an interview. Anyone? Let's not wait for these things, right? If you can, whatever you think. So there are a couple of ways to manage the CSS. You can use CSS variables. You can use inline styles, but inline style is not appropriate, right? But there are a couple of ways to do that. Yeah, so it's something like a function, right? And its only job is to getting reused, right? It's just two things. It can be reused and it just return whatever it is supposed to, right? And that is what a hook is. So can't we do that on our own? We can do that, right? So rather than importing this manually every time and doing something like this, right, it's very easy that we create a custom hook. So what we can do, we can go to our team context. We don't need to export it. We can just create a hook. We can say const, we can give it our name, let's say use theme. So always use because that's how it differentiates between a normal function as a and a hook, right? But ultimately it's a normal function that will return every time the same thing. So we want to return the use context that is automatically pass the theme context. And now things become really simple because we can export this and we can go to our home, and rather than using this we can just say use theme, and it should work as expected and we don't need to import all those headache again, right? So now we can go here and you can see that it works fine. Is it clear? So we have created our custom hook as well, and it is very easy to create it. It's just a matter of implementation, right? So we did it like this. This part is clear, guys, right? And one more thing we can do. So Rajiv asked about styles, right? So what we can do is, so we can change the styles. So one way is that we use, let's say, so we have the main file that is index.css, right? And I think it's getting imported here. So on the top, we can do something like this. We can define the root styles and we can give it based on the attribute. So let's say data theme. So there are a couple of ways to do that. This is one of the thing. And let's say that if it is light, we can say dash dash bg. We can say light, let's say, okay, we can say text and black. And we can opposite that in case of dark. So this is how you can define the variables if you want, but there are easier ways as well. Okay, now we can target the body and we can give it a background. And how to use that? We can say var and we can pass bg here. And for color, we can say var and we can pass the text here, right? And we need to use this body. Okay, or you can use Tailwind CSS, you can use MUI, you can use anything, right? Or I think what we can do is, we already have theme, so we can do some DOM manipulation, we can do that. Okay, so kind of we have in the body, we have this, but let's change it to black. Let's see if it's working first of all. Yeah, so we have a body, but I don't think it's affecting it as of now. So what we can do, we have to give this attribute to index.html. So we can say data theme to be light. Still nothing. I think that should work. Let's go to the elements. Okay, it's saying PG is not defined. We already defined that. So let's find out. Yeah, I think that is what we did, right? Okay, so this is the mistake that we did because we are targeting the root styles. I think it should be here. Let's keep it light. Yeah, now it's fine. And what we can do is we can change it back to this part. And now what we have to do, guys, is we have to change this theme. We have to change this attribute. So we have to change this particular attribute, right? So we'll do some DOM manipulation. But we have to do it where? That is the question, right? So when you go to theme context, you would see that the theme is changing here, right? So in React, we have something called as effects. And those effects can be done by another hook that is called as useEffect. So how do we use the useEffect is we say that okay, useEffect, and useEffect takes two things argument. It takes a function as the first argument that we want to do, and it takes a dependency array. Now you can skip that, you can put the dependency array, or you can put something in the dependency. So when you do something like this, the theme is changing, right? The state is changing, so it will re-render. So we can say console.log useEffect called, right? So this particular case will ensure, because since you have an empty dependency array, this means that it will be called after the component mounts or gets inserted to the DOM. That means once this component is inserted to the DOM or this component mounts, this will be called, and only once. So how to test it out? We can go to console. We can say refresh. It is called for the first time, and when we change the state, it is not getting called again, right? But we want to put some dependency. We want that it should only get changed when the theme changes, right? The theme state. So we can pass that as dependency. Since it's an array, it can take any number of values. So this means what? The first time it will render, first time it will be called, and then subsequently will be called when theme changes, right? So now if I go here, I refresh, it is called for the first time. Now the theme changes, it is getting called again. Theme changes, it is getting called again, right? So this use effect is basically used to run an after effect. So you can use it to coordinate with the data fetching APIs, the external things, right? Subscription or unsubscribe events, or maybe DOM manipulation or anything, right? So when this particular piece of function is running, at that point, what we want is we want to just say document dot, what we can say is, I think we have something called as document element, that is the main element, and there we can say set attribute, and the attribute that we have put is data theme, and we want to change whatever the theme value is, right? So this should go to the HTML element, go to its attribute property, and insert whatever the value that we have. So if I go here, if I refresh, it works fine. So this is one of the way. If it was Tailwind, then it is just conditionally giving classes. There are a couple of ways. This is one of the way, and there are more easier ways as well, right? But this is one of the way that you can do. Or you could give inline styles, or you could have done that, right? So any questions here, anyone? Okay. So we can create our own custom hooks. We can use this context API, right? So I would say, guys, practice this out on your own, and then it will make more sense. Okay. So any questions here, anyone? Whatever we have covered so far. So now you can call it basically a state management thing, guys. Why? Because alone context API cannot do anything. So for managing the state, what we are using, guys? What we are using to manage the state? We are using state, right? So it's a combination. Okay, so let's complete one more important topic, guys. And so what I'll do is I'll create a copy. Let's paste it here. And to this, I would say context API, although it will have the other code as well. And here, since we are inside this, now we can go say npm I and again start the server. Okay, so now we can go to the main file, then we don't require this. Let's go to app. And now we'll talk about, guys, something called as use reducer. And it is just it is just you can say it's like a use state. What is the purpose of use state? The use state purpose is to give us the initial state and give us the function to set the state, right? Now, state is very important in front-end application and it can grow larger, right? It can become complex. So what I do is, see, you can use reducer for smaller cases as well, but I prefer use reducers, or normally it is preferred for managing state, for managing complex state. For easier, you can use state, but for managing complex state, you can use reducer. The purpose is exactly the same. So let us create a real world example and let us see how we can work with that. So we can create a component, let's say function shopping cart. It can be kind of an e-commerce cart. And for now, we can return a div. Let's give it some style of, let's say, padding 20 on all sides. And let's say h1 of shopping cart. And let's see if that works. So we want to call it here. Okay, great. So now what we want is, we have, let's say, a products. So we can say const products, and we can have an array of objects. So we can say ID of 1. So this is how we get the data from the backend. And we can say the name of the product, let's say iPhone. And the price, let's say, is can give any price, let's say 60,000. And then we can have another one, let's say 2. You can name it anything, let's say Mac. Okay, so we have two products, and what do we want is, we want to list the products. So we can say h2 of products. And how do we list it? We can say products. So we are writing JavaScript dot map, and we can map to each of the product, and we can return a div. And always remember, guys, whenever you are mapping a list of items, you should always give it a key, and key has to be unique. So p.id, id is unique, right? So that React will know that each of the div is a different element. There are of course a lot of things to consider in keys, but always remember keys should be unique, right? So we can say here, let's say we want to list p dot name, that is the name of the product. So we see iPhone and Mac listed here, right? We can also give it some inline styles for now. So let's give it a padding of 10 all sides. Let's say margin top and bottom 10 pixels and 0, and we can give it some border. Okay, so this is how it will look. And then we have a button. So we can say button add to cart. Okay, let's give it a style, margin left of let's say 10. So we have add to cart. That's fine. Let's give a horizontal line just to differentiate. And here we can have NH2 and we can say cart or your cart or whatever. So right, we have your cart. Let's have a style, margin top. Okay. So we want to be able to add to the cart from the products and it should display on the cart section, right? So this part is clear, everyone, what we are trying to do. Right? So products is coming from the API. Okay, so consider this that it's coming from the API. Currently we have a static, but it's coming from the API. So what would be the state that we have to manage from the UI? Do we have to manage the product state or do we have to manage the cart state? That is the first question. Do we have to manage the cart state or do we have to manage the product state? Product is something that will keep on coming from the API, right? You just have to display. But we have to manage the cart state exactly. So how do we do that in use reducer? So what we can do is we can go on top and we can create a initial cart and object. In this object we can have the items. You can structure it however you want, whatever you feel easy, but we can structure it like this. This is one way that we have an object and then we have the items array, and we will use reducer here because now the things can become complex because you have to add from the cart, you have to remove from the cart, you have to reset the cart, right? So you can say const, first of all you'll say use reducer And just like useState, it takes the initial state. So we can say initial, basically it will take two things, right? I'll tell you that. But it will return an array again of two things. It will return the state, so we can call it as a state, and it will give you a dispatch function. That is something different. It will give you a dispatch function, and in the arguments it will take two things. It will take the reducer function, and it will take the initial state or the initial card, you can say. So you can say initial card, initial state, whatever. This reducer is something that we have to create, and it gives us the state and dispatch. So I'll come to the flow. Like after we create this, okay. But let us try to implement it for now. So you can call it as a reducer, or you can call it as a card reducer as per your naming conventions, right? But what is this card reducer, or it's a reducer, guys? It's very uh simple, guys. It's what is this reducer? Reducer is a pure function. That means for every same input, it will give same output. It is not polluted. This is just a naming convention, but ultimately it's just a function. It's just a function that will take two things. It will take a state that we want to manipulate, and it will take the action. So action is something that describes your application. So what could be the actions in case of uh, cart, shopping cart? What kind of actions can it be, right? Add to cart, remove to cart, that's it. Or increase quantity, decrease quantity, clear cart, all those things, right? So what we can do, so this is the pattern that the structure. So action is nothing but an object. Action is an object that describes what you want to do. So what do we want to do, guys? So based on the type, we will do something. Right? So based on the action type, we can have a switch case statement. So we can say based on the action type. This is how we used it in production, guys. You can action can be an object, so there is a type that they use, right? So it will make sense once we implement it. And we can say if the case, if the type is, you can have a uppercase, something like that, strings, add to cart. Then you want to do something, right? These are the actions, these are the cases. Okay. So other case could be that you want to decrease the quantity. Okay, we can return. Other case could be you want to remove from cart. So these are the actions. Actions described what you want to do. So we want to do these things, right? It could be anything depending on your requirements. That is why use reducer is important and it's being used for complex state management, because you can see all the actions are clearly visible. If this is the case, then what will be the logic? If this is the case, then what will be the logic? Right? But if it's a default case, that means there is no action, then you can just return that particular state as it is. Right? So this pattern is very, very important. This is being used in Redux as well. So this is how we structure it, and it will make more sense once we start working with this, right? So what we can do now is, let's build one functionality. Let's say add to cart. So we get the state from the reducer, we are passing the initial state, and we are getting a dispatch function. So we dispatch an action. What is the action? These are the actions. So action is an object that we describe what we want to do, right? So on the first case where we have add to cart, here what we want, guys, user will click on a button. So we can say on click. So whenever the user will click on a button, we run a callback. This callback will get executed and we will call the dispatch function. Now dispatch function, it will dispatch an action, right? You dispatch an action. So what that action would be? That action would be an object, and since we are using action.type, what should be the type here, guys, for add to cart? What should be the type here? That makes sense, right? It will be add to cart. The type would be add to cart. But when you are adding to cart, you also want to send some product detail, because that product you are adding, right? So that you can send as a payload. So these are the two terms that is being used in industry, that is type and payload. That is why we are also using. Otherwise you can send whatever you want. So we send the whole product details in the payload, and whenever you dispatch an action, the reducer will interpret it, because you can see the reducer is taking the state and the action, and whenever we have some action change or some action dispatch, the reducer interprets it, and we can say console.log action, and let's see that is happening right in the console. So when I say add to cart, you can see the action is interpreted by the reducer, that is add to cart, right? Now there you have item type as the add to cart and payload as the object itself. So now we can write the logic. We can say const item or the product that we have is in action dot payload, and then we can say const state to be not const state. What we can do is we can say return whatever the existing state is, along with we want to have the items array, and here we can copy whatever the state dot items is, right? Because the state is the whole state, and we want to copy the whole state, we want to copy the items array, and we want to add the item, and since it is adding for the first time, we can add the quantity key as 1. And what we can do is we can go here, we can say console.log state, And when that happens, the state will automatically be the UI will render and you will see the state here. So let's say add to cart, you can see the action happens, the reducer interprets the action, and based on that action it updates the state and you see updated state here. So now the items array contains one product with the quantity 1. Is it making sense, guys? Are you there with me? But the problem here is, if we add click on that again, then this is not what we want, right? This is not what we want. If it's already there, then we have to update the quantity. So what we can do is we can write a logic here and you can add comments, guys. See, this would be a step-by-step process, and that's why the reason of telling you use reducer was that we create something a little bit complex thing, right? So we have the item. We first check if the item already exists, right? And if it exists, then we update the quantity. Else else we add it as a new item with quantity 1. So we only implemented the first and the easiest case, right? Now we first need to check if the item already exists, and there are a couple of ways to do that. We can say const existing equals, let's say, state dot items. So we have the items array and we can find that, right? So we can say whatever the item we have, we want to return that item, where item dot id is equal to the item that we have here from the payload. So what we are getting it from the payload, it should be equal to the id that state already contains, that the card state already contains. So if it is existing, that means existing will return true. So if existing, in that case we can say return all of the state whatever we have. And in case of items array, we want to update, copy all of the state dot items. Sorry, in this case what we have to do is we want to increase the quantity, right? So we can say state dot items, and we can say dot map for every single item or I. We can say if item dot id is equal to this item dot id that is coming from payload. In that case we will copy the existing item elements, but we will change the quantity. So quantity will be quantity key will be I dot quantity, that is the existing quantity, plus 1. Otherwise, if it's the id is not equal, then we return the item or the I as it is. Now if this works, we can go here, we can say add to cart, add to cart. So now we should have 2 items in the array. But now if I click on that again we should have 2 items, but the first one should have 2 quantity, right? And since we already have the state are getting updated in the console, it is automatically re-rendering, right? Because the state has been changed. So we can go to our your card option, and in the your card option what we can do is we can write a simple logic. We can say if state dot items dot length is equal to 0, in that case we can say a p tag, no items yet. That makes sense because yes, there is no items. But if there is items, right, then we can say state dot items. Again we can say dot map for every single item. What we can do is we can return a div. What happened here? Okay, so it should be in brackets state dot items dot map, and whatever the item that we have, we want to return a div element. Now if you remember, whenever we map the list of items, we give it a key, so that we already have, so we can give item dot id, right? And we can say style. You can give it any style if you want. Let's say display of flex, gap of 20, align items to be center, and margin to be 10 px and 0. Okay, and similarly we can render those items. We can say strong. And how to render those items? So every item has a name that we already know. You can console and check. So you should see the item here, and along with the item we should also show the quantity. So we can have a span element, and we can say quantity to be item dot quantity. So we should see the quantity here as well. And then we can have a button, or we can have, rather than, we can have 3 buttons, right? A button to add, a button to remove, all those things. So that is something that you can do as your homework. You can complete all these things, right? Or maybe I'll tell you by tomorrow what we can do that. So we will have a revisit on this topic. But now if you see that if I go here, if I refresh, no items yet. If I add, we get a quantity 1. If I add, we get another quantity 1. It changed the quantity to 2. It changed the quantity to how many the items that we add. So for all these complex setup, we require this thing. And it is very, very important, guys, to understand how this particular thing works is. So let me just give you an overview. So we have a UI. Okay. We have a UI, and the UI dispatches an action. Quick question, guys. UI dispatches an action. right? This action is interpreted by whom? This action is read by whom or interpreted by whom? By reducer. So based on some action, the reducer updates the state. To some sort of store. It could be inbuilt store or some other store. Right. And that updated state goes back to the UI again. This is the whole flow that you need to remember, because the interviewer will never ask you to implement the setup, right? The complex setup. This is for your understanding. But if you have this mental model, right, and that you can get after implementing this, then this is what that you should tell to the interviewer. So I know we have studied a couple of important concepts now, right? And we have implemented in detail. And there are a lot of syntax things that you need to practice. So, guys, please practice this context setup and the reducer setup. And we can take up your questions and we can revisit them tomorrow. So, if you guys have any questions now, you can ask. Otherwise, we can end the session. I'll just push the code, right? So, give me a minute. So,
Sahil,
meanwhile,
I'm a bit confused about when to use semicolon. I mean, like that's the one I'm a little bit worried compared with the JavaScript and this code. I mean, this code.
when to use semicolon where? In which case?
Uh,
So, for example, end of the line.
yeah, exactly. At the end of the line.
So one thing is that use it everywhere. End of the line. I also do that because
Maybe I mean,
JavaScript.
but if you see, it's come a couple of the declared lines on the constant, right? We are adding it, and in couple of lines, I don't see that. So I was just confused with that.
So this is the, yeah. So you can skip as well. So let me give you the idea. One second. Let me push the code. Okay, let me showcase that to you. You see screen, Nazir.
Yeah.
So here you will not add because it's a object, right? We are adding a comma, but everywhere here you can add.
No, no, not at the end of the my object declaration. I mean the error
Yeah,
declaration.
here we
Like
can add. Here we can add.
yeah. So those things, yeah, I'm a bit confused when the session is going on. Yeah,
So you
I'm
add
good
it,
on this.
na?
So
See, if you don't add it, it will automatically assume it to be end line. But a good practice is to add it everywhere.
all right, yeah, yeah.
Because ultimately, see, there are few cases where it will interpret it wrong. Even though it's optional,
True.
Rajiv, I would ask you guys to always do that, right? Because there could be some cases where it might break if you're
Yeah,
using short.
in the return statement, definitely it shouldn't have it. But while the declaring these
Right.
variables, I do see that's why I just got confused whether it's part of the React code format or I just want to confirm it.
No, it's part of JavaScript, and that's why I emphasized on JavaScript a lot, right? Because now you see all the logic is ultimately JavaScript. So you do that for declarations, at least you do, otherwise it will interpret it in the wrong manner and it can produce bugs.
Yeah, thanks, Sahil. I'm good on this.
Okay, great. So any other questions, guys? Let me push the changes as well. Okay, so you will get this here. The code is being pushed. I guess everyone has that link, right? So I'm sharing it again. So please practice this, guys. These are very, very important core parts of React, as in a lot of interviews, and you will work this on day-to-day basis, right? So practice this out. There can be different implementation ways. That is fine, but you should have the core idea. That's why we are drawing out the boxes, right? So try to complete the other part in use reducer, and let's see. Tomorrow we can take up more of your questions. Okay. So bye everyone. Take care. Have a great day. Let's meet tomorrow.